And you can let people know that it's being recorded. Remember to mute yourself if you're not speaking. It's 8 o'clock. Should I open the room up?
Welcome. Tonight we begin the commemoration Tisha B'Av, which helps us remember an important Jewish value, to remember the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. And again, the destruction of the temple by the Romans in 70 CE. It's the experience of Tisha B'Av is about exile. It's about us being homeless as a people, and about God having left us, the Shekhinah abandoning us. And in fact, the Book of Lamentations, which has been turned into a play this evening, begins with the word Echa. How can it be? And this word is connected to the same word when Adam and Eve are exiled from the Garden of Eden, when God says, Ayeka, what are you doing? How could you do this? There's a problem in monotheism. If God is good and God knows all and does all, that if something terrible happens, it must be our fault. And you will see that theme. But what I'm hoping we might connect it to, and if people want to stay afterward, we'll conclude with a few moments of silence. If people want to stay after for discussion and talk about maybe the pandemic, global warming, how these themes are echoing part of what we'll hear tonight. Viewer discretion is advised. There's some very painful lines in the readings that we'll do tonight that are in the Book of Lamentations. And the proposed writer of the Book of Lamentations is the prophet Jeremiah, who this evening will be played by Corey, who is an eyewitness to the Babylonian destruction. Jeremiah was known for having bouts of terrible depression. We're being recorded tonight, so you should know that. Deborah and Pat will be playing a couple of different parts. One of the parts is the various nations who have wished for Zion or Jerusalem to be conquered over the years. Another part is of some mourning women. There are 5 acts to the play, and I will announce each act as it begins because the voices are somewhat different. The mood of the acts is different. I want to just share a couple of customs. Usually on Tisha B'Av, we would gather without greeting each other. We would sit on the floor in darkness, only a candle lighting our way as we read or listen to the chanting. And when we leave, we would leave without saying goodbye. But tonight I want to keep open for any discussion that people might want to have. And of course, we would begin a fast in the evening. I want to say one more thing, that while Tisha B'Av begins with great sadness, toward the close of the holiday on Sunday evening, there's a note of hopefulness and joy. The Messiah is supposed to be born on Tisha B'Av, and for those who want to stay, I have a brief Hasidic tale that I can read to you at the end of the evening that reflects that note of joy. With that, I think we will light our candles. And if I've left anything out, if any of my co-workers here would like to add. Okay, I'm going to light my candle and we'll begin. Echa yoshvacha badad ha'ir batiyam aita ka'almana rabati bagoyi sarati bamdinot aita Lamas. Act 1.
This is Jeremiah reporting to you from Biblical Times in biblical verse about Jerusalem today. Echa, how lonely sits the city, once thronging with people. She that was great among nations has become like a widow. Once princess among states has become a slave. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. There is none to comfort her among all who loved her. All her allies have betrayed her, they have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile because of suffering and endless servitude. When she settled among the nations, she found no rest. All her pursuers overtook her in narrow straits. Zion's roads are in mourning, empty of festival pilgrims. All her gates are deserted, her priests sigh, her maidens are unhappy. She herself is embittered. Her adversaries have become her masters, her foes are at ease, because God has afflicted her for her many transgressions. Her young children have gone into captivity before the enemy. Gone from fair Zion is all her splendor. Her leaders were like deer that found no pasture, but walked on without strength before the pursuer. All the precious things she had in the days of old, Jerusalem recalled in her days of woe and sorrow, when her people fell by enemy hands with none to help her, when enemies looked on and gloated over her downfall. Jerusalem has greatly sinned, therefore she has become a wanderer. All who once admired her disparage her, for they have seen her nakedness. She herself sighs and turns away. Her uncleanness clings to her skirts. She gave no thought to her future. She has sunk appallingly, with none to comfort her.
See, O God, my misery, how the enemy has become great.
The foe has laid hands on everything dear to her. She has seen her sanctuary invaded by nations, whom you had forbidden to enter your congregation. All her inhabitants sigh as they reach for bread. They have bartered their treasures for food to keep themselves alive.
See, O God, and behold, how abject I have become. May it never befall you, all who pass by this road. Look about and see. Is there any pain like my pain, which was dealt out to me when God afflicted me on his day of wrath? From above, God sent a fire down into my bones. God spread a net for my feet. God hurled me backward. God has left me forlorn, in constant misery. The yoke of my offenses is bound fast, lashed tight by God's hand, imposed upon my neck. It saps my strength. God has delivered me into the hands of those I cannot withstand. God in my midst has rejected all my heroes, proclaiming a set time against me to crush my young men. As in a press, God has trodden fair maiden Judah. For these things do I weep. My eyes flow with tears. Far from me is any comforter who might revive my spirit. My children are forlorn, for the foe has prevailed.
Zion spreads out her hands. She has no one to comfort her. God has summoned enemies against Jacob. Jerusalem has become among them a thing unclean.
God is in the right, for I have disobeyed. Hear, all you peoples, and behold my agony. My maidens and my youths have gone into captivity. I cried out to my friends, but they played me false. My priests and my elders have perished in the city as they searched for food to keep themselves alive. See, O God, this distress I am in. My bowels are stewing, and my mind has gone awry. I know how wrong I was to disobey. Outside, the sword deals death. Indoors, plague. When they heard how I was sighing, there was none to comfort me. All my foes heard of my plight and exulted, for it is your doing, You have brought on the day that you threatened. Oh, let them become like me. Let all their wrongdoings come before you and deal with them as you have dealt with me. For all my transgressions, for all my sighs are many, and my heart is sick.
Act 2.
Echa. God in anger has shamed fair Zion, has cast down from heaven to earth the glory of Israel. God did not remember his footstool on his day of wrath. God has laid waste without pity all the dwellings of Jacob. God has razed in anger fair Judah's strongholds down to the ground. God has profaned the kingdom and its leaders. In blazing anger, God has cut down all the dignity of Israel. God's right hand has been withdrawn in the presence of the foe. God burned through Jacob like a flaming fire, consuming on all sides. God bent his bow like an enemy, poised his right hand like a foe. God slew all who delighted the eye. God poured out his wrath like fire in the tent of fair Zion. God has acted like an enemy. God has consumed Israel, consumed all her citadel, destroyed her strongholds. God has increased within fair Judah mourning and moaning. God has stripped his booth like a garden and has destroyed his tabernacle. God has made Zion oblivious of festival and Sabbath. In his raging anger, God has spurned king and the priest. God has rejected his altar, disdained his sanctuary. God has handed over to the foe the walls of his citadels. They raise in a shout in God's house as on a festival day. God resolved to destroy the wall of fair Zion. God measured with a line, refrained not from bringing destruction. God has made wall and rampart to mourn. Together they languish. Her gates have sunk into the ground. God has smashed her bars to bits. Her king and her leaders are in exile. There is no Torah. Her prophets, too, find no vision from God. My eyes are spent with tears. My heart is in tumult. My being melts away over the ruin of my poor people, as babes and sucklings languish in the squares of the city.
Mother, where's bread and wine? Where's bread and wine?
These children languish like battle wounded in the squares of the town as their life runs out in their mothers' bosoms. With what shall I bear as witness for you? To what can I compare you, O fair Jerusalem? What can I match with you to console you, O fair maiden Zion? For your ruin is vast as the sea. Who can heal you? Your prophets have seen visions for you of delusion and folly. They do not expose your iniquity. They did not expose your iniquity so as to bring you back in repentance, but prophesied to you oracles of delusion and deception. All who pass your way clap their hands at you. They hiss and wag their head at fair Jerusalem.
Unmute. Pat, could you unmute, please?
And my timing was so perfect on that. Is this the city that was called perfect in beauty, joy of all the earth?
All your enemies jeer at you. They hiss and gnash their teeth, crying,
"We've ruined her. Ah, this is the day we longed for. We have lived to see it."
God has carried out his decree that was ordained long ago. God has torn down without pity. God has let the foe rejoice over you, has exalted the might of your enemies. Their heart cried out to God, O wall of fair Zion, shed tears like a torrent day and night. Give yourself no respite, your eyes no rest. Arise, cry out in the night at the beginning of the watches. Pour out your heart like water in the presence of God. Lift up your hands to God for the life of your infants who faint for hunger at every street corner.
That's young. But
Damn. See, O God, and behold, to whom you have done this. Must women eat the fruit of their wombs, the children they have held in their arms? Should priest and prophet be slain in the sanctuary of God?
Priest and prophet are slain in the sanctuary of God.
Prostrate in the streets lie both young and old. My maidens and youths are fallen by the sword. You slew them on your day of wrath. You slaughtered without pity. You summoned, as on a festival, my neighbors from round about. On the day of the wrath of God, none survived or escaped. All whom I have held in my arms and reared, my enemies have consumed.
if you slide your cursor over the squares, you'll see the role that people are playing. We'll begin Act 3.
Oh, sorry. Well, that was perfect. Mm-hmm. I am the man who has known affliction under the rod of God's wrath. It was I who God drove on and on in unrelieved darkness. On none but
Jeremiah
me.
Speaking.
On none but me, God brings down his hand again and again without cease. God has worn away my flesh and skin and shattered my bones. All around me, God has built misery and hardship. God has cast me in a place of darkness like those long dead. God has walled me in and I cannot break out. God has weighed me down with chains. Even when I cry and plead for help, he rejects my prayer. God has walled me in my ways with blocks of stone and made my paths a maze. God lies in wait for me like a bear or a lion in hiding. God has forced me off my way, mangled me, and left me numb. God has bent his bow and made me the target of his arrow. He has shot into my vitals with shafts from his quiver. I have become a laughing stock to all nations, the butt of their jibes all day long. God has filled me with bitterness, sated me with wormwood. God has broken my teeth on gravel, has ground me into the dust. Peace has gone from my life. I have forgotten what happiness is, and I say, gone is my world and my hope. Remember my distress and my misery, the wormwood and the poison. Whenever I think of them, I become despondent. But this do I call to mind. Therefore, I have hope. The kindness of God has not ended. His mercies are not spent. They are renewed every morning. Ample is your grace. God is my portion, I say with full heart. Therefore, I will hope in God. God is good to those who trust in him. To the one who seeks him, it is good to wait patiently till rescue comes from God. It is good for a man when young to bear a yoke. Let the young man sit alone and be patient when God has laid it upon him. Let him put his mouth to the dust. There may be yet hope. Let him offer his cheek to the smiter. Let him be surfeited with mockery, for God does not reject forever, but first afflicts, then pardons in his abundant kindness. For God does not willfully bring grief or affliction to man.
Nor crush under his feet all the prisoners of the earth, to deny a man justice in the presence of the Most High, to wrong a man in his cause. This God chooses.
Whose decree was ever fulfilled unless God willed it? It is not of the word of Most High that weal and woe befall. And what shall a living man complain about his own sins. Let us search and examine our ways and turn back to God. Let us lift up our hearts with our hands to God in heaven.
We have transgressed and rebelled, and you have not forgiven.
You have clothed yourself in anger and pursued us. You have slain without pity.
You have screened yourself off with a cloud, that no prayer may pass through.
You have made us filth and refuse in the midst of the peoples.
All our enemies loudly rail against us.
Panic and pitfall are our lot, death and destruction.
You, Pop.
Where? My eyes shed streams of water over the ruin of my poor people. My eyes shall flow without cease, without respite, until God looks down and beholds from heaven. My eyes have brought me grief over all the maidens of my city. My foes have snared me like a bird without any cause. They cut off my life in a pit and cast stones at me. Water flowed over my head. I said, I am lost. I have called on your name, O God, from the depths of the pit. Hear my plea. Do not shut your ear to my groan, to my cry. You have ever drawn nigh when I called you. You have said,
Al-Tira, do not fear. Al-Tira.
you have championed my cause, O God. You have redeemed my life. You have seen, O God, the wrong done me. Oh, vindicate my right. You have seen all their malice, all their designs against me. You have heard, O God, their taunts, all their designs against me. The mouthings and prattlings of my adversaries against me all day long. See how at their ease or at work, I am the butt of their jibes. Pay them back, God, as they have done. Give them anguish at heart. Your curse be upon them. Pursue them in wrath and destroy them from under the heavens of God.
Act 4 will open with a group of women mourners.
The gold is dulled, debased the finest gold. The sacred gems are spilled at every street corner.
The precious children of Zion, once valued as gold, alas, they are accounted as earthen pots, work of a potter's hands.
Even jackals offer the breast and suckle their young, but my poor people has turned cruel, like ostriches in the desert.
The tongue of the suckling cleaves to its palate for thirst. Little children beg for bread. None gives them a morsel.
Those who feasted on dainties lie famished in the streets. Those who were reared in purple have embraced refuse heaps.
The guilt of my poor people exceeded the iniquity of Sodom, which was overthrown in a moment without a hand striking it.
Her elect were purer than snow, whiter than milk. Their limbs were ruddier than coral, their bodies like sapphire.
Now their faces are blacker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin is shriveled on their bones. It has become dry as wood.
Better off were the slain of the sword than those slain by famine, who pined away as though wounded for lack of the fruits of the field.
With their own hands, tender-hearted women have cooked their children. Such became their fare in the disaster of my poor people.
God vented all his fury, poured out his blazing wrath. God kindled a fire in Zion, which consumed its foundations.
The kings of the earth did not believe, nor any of the inhabitants of the world, that foe or adversary could enter the gates of Jerusalem.
It was for the sins of her prophets, the iniquities of her priests, who had shed in her midst the blood of the just.
They wandered blindly through the streets, defiled with blood, so that no one was able to touch their garments.
Away, unclean, people shouted at them. Away, away, touch not. So they wandered and wandered again, for the nations had resolved, they shall stay here no longer.
God's countenance has turned away from them. God will look at them no more. They showed no regard for priests nor favor to elders.
Even now our eyes pine away in vain for deliverance. As we waited, we wait for a nation that cannot help.
Our steps were checked. We could not walk in our squares. Our doom is near. Our days are done. Alas, our doom has come.
Our pursuers were swifter than the eagles in the sky. They chased us in the mountains, lay in wait for us in the wilderness.
The breath of our life, God's anointed, was captured in their traps. God, in whose shade we had thought to live among the nations.
Rejoice and exult, fair Edom, who dwell in the land of Uz. To you, too, the cup shall pass. You shall get drunk and expose your nakedness. Your iniquity, fair Zion, is expiated. God will exile you no longer. Your iniquity, fair Edom, God will note. God will uncover your sins.
As we come to the concluding chapter, which is slightly more hopeful, fair Zion is confessing her sins.
Okay. Remember, O God, what has befallen us. Behold and see our disgrace.
Our heritage has passed to aliens, our homes to strangers.
We have become orphans, fatherless. Our mothers are like widows.
We must pay to drink our own water, obtain our own kindling at a price.
We are hotly pursued. Exhausted, we are given no rest.
We hold out a hand to Egypt, to Assyria for our fill of bread.
Our fathers sinned and are no more, and we must bear their guilt.
Slaves are ruling over us with none to rescue us from them.
We get our bread at the peril of our lives because of the sword of wilderness.
Our skin glows like an oven with the fever of famine.
They have ravished women in Zion, maidens in the town of Judah.
Princes have been hanged by them. No respect has been shown to elders.
Young men must carry millstones, and youth stagger under loads of wood.
The old men are gone from the gate, the young men from their music.
Gone is the joy of our hearts. Our dancing is turned into mourning.
The crown has fallen from our head. Woe to us that we have sinned.
This is why we are sick at heart. All this is why our eyes are dimmed.
Because Mount Sion lies desolate, foxes prowling over it.
But you, O God, are enthroned forever. Your throne endures through the ages.
Why have you forgotten us utterly, forsaken us for all time?
Take us back, O God, to yourself, and let us come back. Renew our days as of old, for truly you have rejected us, bitterly raged against us.
Take us back, O God, to yourself, and let us come back.
Renew our days as of old.
Ashivenu, Ashivenu, Adonai Elecha, Vena Shuva, Vena Shuva, Hadesh, Hadesh, Yameinu.
I wanted to reserve some time, because that's a heavy reading, for people who might have thoughts or questions and any resonances to our current situation.
I'll say for me, having read it several times, each time it sunk in deeper about these times, they never change. Our skin is burning, and just, feeling abandoned, it's not really abandoned, but for me, it's just aging, becoming aware of not just the mortality that my ancestors have become aware of as they've aged, but the mortality of the planet itself. And, in this information age where we have quick access to things, if we are paying attention, that are happening all over the world now, these feelings must be felt by many people of abandonment.
And of being refugees.
And isolated.
Did we lose all our guests?
No, we're here.
You're here. Okay.
I have a comment.
Yes.
Comment is, so in this play, apparently the humans did something to anger God, who caused these terrible things to happen. And nowadays, we don't see things that way, because, we just know things happen, like the pandemic happened, but it wasn't God causing the pandemic to punish us or something. And if people have that point of view, we don't much like it, rational folks don't much like that. So that's just my comment. Other than that, I can certainly see similarities between then and now in terms of suffering and humans really feeling, depressed and downtrodden and just really sad and really suffering. So
I want to respond to you, Narisa. I agree. Although this wasn't like the pandemic. This was a political situation. And what I learned is where Israel is located is the bridge between two continents. And whoever has control over that bridge place, it's a very strategic spot, and it's a little tiny spot between Babylonia and Egypt, or Rome and these other huge nations that want that little spot. And it's almost destined to become a battleground. But there also, I think there's also notes of, greed and betrayal and priests and people in charge doing things that were not creating peace. I mean, like our big nation has done some things that have not created peace in the world. It's a complicated situation.
Narissa pegged it, though, that like we call that blaming the victim now, but
we do.
But one thing that struck me about there's this recurring thing of women having to eat their children, which it's just when you sort of pick the most horrific image you could pick, that's pretty much it. And that's, there's a couple times in the Torah where when you choose to follow the covenant or not follow the covenant, you can be blessed or cursed. And if I remember right, that specific curse is one of the ones that comes up. I don't know if it's the telling in Deuteronomy or the telling earlier in the Torah, but
Yes.
women eating their
curse.
children, or eating their aborted fetuses, or just gross, horrible images, or even that it's so bad that even your enemies won't eat your children. It's just like that particular image. I don't know why that keeps coming up in the Torah, and in the Bible, but it's because
men wrote it.
Maybe that's it, but it's really
gut-wrenching.
It's like, pardon?
Gut-wrenching.
Yeah, it's gut-wrenching. It's revolting. It's horrible. It's painful to even hear.
Yes, we had a discussion earlier about what a gut-grabbing line that is, the worst part of this. I heard lately that a phrase that was interesting, that actually this isn't related to that, but that religion is partly trying to understand or make meaning or control things that we're out of control. And this was just ununderstandable, how God's dwelling place could be sacked and burnt and destroyed. And the people were trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just the building, it was God's dwelling. That meant God was leaving. God was not there protecting it. And it was terrifying. I have a little Hasidic tale that's a little more hopeful if you'd like to hear it. Yeah, should we? Okay, to end the evening a little bit more hopeful. To the little town of Svat, where the air is clearest and it is possible to see the furthest in all the land of Israel, long ago there came a chassid visiting from Vitebsk to see his Rebbe. For his Rebbe had chosen to settle in the land of Israel. The chassid stood at the door of a pale and quiet synagogue, so pale, so quiet that the pastel paintings on its walls and ceiling stood out as though they were in vivid colors. The visitor frowned, twirled his beard, and turned to ask the Rebbe, "What is this painting just above the bima? It looks like the dome that the Ishmaelites, the Muslims, have built above the rock where Abraham bound Isaac. The giant golden dome that they have built where stood the temple. I have just come from Jerusalem. It looks," he stopped. The Rebbe's eyes turned inward. "I have seen," he said and paused. "I have seen," he said and paused again. "Our rabbis teach us that when the Messiah comes, he will rebuild the holy temple in the twinkling of an eye. How can this be? Messiah will be extraordinary, yet still a human being, merely, but I have seen. Well, let me tell you. At the foot of the Western Wall, the wall where God's presence weeps and hides in exile, I have seen hundreds of thousands of Jews gathered, singing, "Messiah has come, the Messiah has come." And they are singing and dancing as the great day dawns. Messiah touches the wall. He tucks one last petition between the great carved stones. He says a sentence to the crowds. I cannot hear it. As if his words have brought forth a river from the stones of the wall, a stream of Jews flows up the stairway that rises to the Temple Mount. The river pauses for a moment on the steps to read a wrinkled, tattered piece of paper signed by the rabbis of that day. It warns all Jews to go no further, lest by accident they walk, God forbid, into the space set aside as the Holy of Holies. Messiah looks, he reads, he laughs. He tears the sign to shreds. The stream of people shudders into a higher ecstasy and the flow resumes. The crowd cascades from the stairway onto the great stone pavement of the Temple Mount. The singing turns to thunder of the great waterfall as they look toward the other end of the mount, toward the great golden dome of the rock where Abraham bound his son to sacrifice. Surrounding the dome are thousands of Muslims, and they are singing. They are shouting, furious and stubborn. Not here, they shout in unison, not here. You will not tear down our holy mosque to build your Jewish temple. But that is the place, no doubt, no doubt. The ancients' studies tell us that that is the place, the people utter. Messiah is quiet. The sea of Jews falls to murmuring and then falls silent. They turn to watch him. He looks, gazes, embraces with fond eyes the holy space. His eyes move across the dome, its gentle golden glow, the green and blues and ivories of the walls beneath it. So beautiful, he whispers. The Muslims too are silent now. The stillness here, the stillness there, so total that they cleave the holy mountain in two. Messiah raises one arm. Slowly, slowly, the Muslims tense, lift their knives and clubs and shake them in the stillness. The Jews tense, ready to leap forward with their picks and shovels. The peoples vibrate. Phantom ram's horns in the silent air, wailing forth a silent sob to heaven. Messiah points straight at the dome. He speaks quietly into the utter quiet. This is the holy temple. He drops his arm. I blink. For seconds, minutes, there's not a sound. Then I hear a Muslim shout and see him raise his knife. No, no, you will not steal our holy mosque to make it your Jewish temple. He throws his knife, but it falls short. No one stirs. The other Muslims turn to look at him. They look with steadfast eyes. No joy, no anger. They just keep looking. He wilts into the crowd. I can no longer see what he is doing. Messiah steps forward, one step. Everyone, Jew and Muslim, breathes a breath. One Jew calls out, "You must not do this. You must not use their dirty place to be our holy temple. Tear it down. We need our own. We know how wide and tall. It is not this." He takes a step toward Messiah, lifts an axe to brandish it. The man beside him reaches out a hand and takes the axe. He just takes it. There's a murmur, but the murmur dies. The man holds the axe level in both hands, and he walks out with it into the no man's land between the crowds. He lays it on the pavement and backs away. There's another time of quiet, and two Muslims reach out from the crowd, toss their knives to land next to the axe. The pause is shorter this time. Then every side, weapons come flying through the air to land beside the axe, beside the knives. There's a pile. Someone walks forward and lights a fire, and the pile begins to burn. The flames reach up to heaven. So I have seen, the Rebbe said, Messiah build the temple in the twinkling of an eye. And so there is this painting on the ceiling. The visitor took a breath again. And why, he said, would the Messiah do this dreadful thing? The Rebbe twirled his own beard this time. For the sake of Abraham's two sons, for the sake of the circles of the dome. Third, for the sake of the rock beneath the dome. And fourth, for the sake of a twinkling of an eye. And why did the people burn their weapons? For the sake of the burnt offering. It is written, choose, you or the temple, or the things you use to burn each other with. So we never read these sad, terrible passages without reminding us of God's promise of hope and peace. And we sing Hashivenu, return to us and we will return. I'm wishing you a meaningful Tisha B'Av. And I think we'll close.
Thank you, Meira. Thank you, all the players.
Yes, players, you were wonderful. Thank you. It was well done. Thank you, Bodhi.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
I love how Elliot just faded to black in this whole thing. It's like the light went out. Good night, Elliot. Good night, Meira. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Robin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lori, yeah.
I thought it went quite well. Were you pleased with how it went?
Very pleased, very
Good.
pleased. Yes,
Good.
yes. And I'm very, very glad that you suggested doing a run through. I wasn't quite on Zoom in my head. I was still meeting in the room in the synagogue.
Yeah. No, I think it was good. We had a chance to work out a few kinks, and I thought everybody did a very, very good job.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a very meaningful service.
Thank you. Thank you for, I couldn't have done it without you, Robin. That's the truth.
Happy to help.
Thank you.
All right. I'll see you soon.
Okay. Good night, Jeremiah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.